Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišak, and I work as the deputy head of the foreign desk at the Slovak daily Pravda, which by the name means truth, and is not the Russian Pravda. Professor of Political Science at the University of Canterbury, Anne-Marie Brady, is a specialist on the Chinese Communist Party. We met in Prague at the Globsec Forum 2026, and in this episode of the Global Agora, we discussed the life and political endeavors of Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping. Does he prefer Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump? Could he stop the Russian war against Ukraine if he wanted to? And is Xi Jinping's domestic political power unlimited? Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. You can find the link in the description of this episode. And now, on to the new debate. Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping recently met with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump within the span of a few days. In your opinion, which of them does Xi Jinping prefer on a personal level?
Well, they're not friends. It's a political relationship. And from Xi Jinping's point of view, from the Chinese Communist Party's point of view, the United States is the chief enemy, the main threat. This is Lenin's idea of the Communist Party. Its strategic thinking is to identify who is the chief enemy, the main threat, and then you form united fronts, temporary alliances against that chief enemy, main threat, in order to undermine their power. So the relationship with Donald Trump is always only ever going to be tactical and identifying weak spots. The history between the People's Republic of China and Russia, and especially Russia under KGB or former KGB leader Putin, and we have a sort of a KGB state now running Russia, is always going to be complex because they had that history where the Soviet Union was the big brother for the Chinese Communist Party. They founded the Chinese Communist Party. The blood and sweat of the Soviet people provided the weapons and other support for the Chinese Communist Party before 1949. And then the Soviet Union provided very substantial financial assistance and technical advisors to the People's Republic of China in the first 10 to 11 years of the founding of that new society. And then they had the big split between Mao Zedong and Khrushchev, and a disagreement on leadership of the communist world, but also strategic disagreements because the Soviets wanted a base in China, a naval base in Port Arthur, and they needed that warm water port, which is an ongoing need for the Russian state. So then with the breakup of the Soviet Union, they had territorial disputes. They had a long time where their relationship was very antagonistic. The Soviet Union threatened a surgical nuclear strike against China in 1969. They have had missiles targeted against China all this time. The February 2022 meeting between Xi Jinping and Putin, and Putin discussed that he was going to invade Ukraine, and Xi Jinping gave him some assurance that he would support this, and the missiles of Russia that were targeted against China just turned back. Now, this is the turning point in the relationship. They are frenemies at best, and we have this perpetual strategic triangle of Russia, China, United States. And at the moment, the United States is at the pointy end of the triangle. In the Cold War era, there was a temporary strategic alliance between the United States and the People's Republic of China, and the Soviet Union was the target. And that was the case all the way up to 1989, when the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China resolved their differences. So this relationship with Putin has all that history, but now Russia is weak and needs China.
So maybe a bit on this relationship between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Is it like this, that Xi Jinping has a power to influence Putin's decisions? Because many people would say, or many people are saying, if China would like to see the Russian war against Ukraine to stop, Beijing has this power. And we know there were, as you said, there were consultations before the war. There is these relations of China also supporting Russia. There are reports about, for example, training drone operators. Do you think that if Xi Jinping would like to see the war stop, it will really like this? Vladimir, stop it, and Vladimir will stop.
Even in the Cold War era, when this is one of the issues between Soviet Union and China, Khrushchev wanted Mao Zedong to stop bombing Taiwan's offshore islands because they had détente with the Americans. And this, even though they had that special relationship, Soviet Union and China, he couldn't tell Mao Zedong to stop. And so now, or think about another example, when Nixon had the rapprochement with China because they wanted to get out of Vietnam and they wanted the Chinese to help stop the Vietnam War. But China, Mao Zedong couldn't tell Ho Chi Minh stop in that war. So the war will follow its own direction, but China could choose to stop its support for Russia, which is military. This dual-use stuff that they are sending as well as training. We see on so many levels how they are supporting Russia in the war against Ukraine. But it's in China's interests, this war. Why would they stop it? They have no reason to stop this war for a number of points of view. First of all, Russia is weaker, and so China becomes dominant. And China gets what it wants, for example, access to the Arctic sea route. Before, the Russians were making China pay a lot of money for transit fees. They've got the missiles to change direction. They have special deals on the oil and other minerals. It's all in China's favor. And at the same time, the Americans come pleading about helping them to end the Iran war, which they won't do. So China's just sitting, watching, enjoying others make mistakes.
From a political standpoint, what are Xi Jinping's greatest strengths and weaknesses within the system he operates in?
He's not very educated. He left school his formal education ended about the age of 11 because of the Cultural Revolution, and he's quite insecure about that. He has a fake PhD from the party school on agricultural economics. He definitely does not have the capability to write a PhD on economics. He got to go to university in the early 1970s when students were allowed to return to university in the Cultural Revolution, and they were called worker peasant soldiers. Imagine if age 11, your education stops, and then nearly, how many years later? So about 7 or 8 years later, you were taken to engineering school. Now, engineering has a whole set of requirements of baseline knowledge. Maths, for example, and maths is like a language. You can't just go to Z. You have to start at ABC. So he was totally unable to study engineering properly, but he graduated because of who his father was. And he was immediately given a job upon graduation as the personal secretary to the Minister of Defense, Geng Biao. And it was under Geng Biao, so this is just after 1979, he started his working career, Xi Jinping, and that was when China was buying a lot of technology from the West. They were allowed to back then, military technology, that is. And Geng Biao authorized the sale of some French submarines that were supposed to operate in the Arctic under the ice for China's second strike nuclear deterrence. And it was a massive investment for China at the time. They were not very wealthy, and they were redundant because they were so noisy, they would be detected. So Geng Biao lost his job because of that. But Xi Jinping, that was a taste for Xi Jinping of the importance of the maritime zone, of the nuclear arsenal. And it was about, at that time is when China's naval doctrine changes from the Soviet one, which was focusing on near seas, to blue water navy and the theories of Alfred Mahn of sea power. So he was this person who was ill-educated, but of a privileged background and involved in very important decision-making when China was poor but ambitious. And now in 2012, he inherited a China that was rich and ready to put in action the policies that had been underway for decades of change in the strategic order in the Indo-Pacific. Now, under his policies, he has managed to seriously damage the Chinese economy. The growth rate has gone from double digits to around 4 or 5%, which sounds exciting to Western developed societies, but it's not good enough for China, which has a very large population, and every year the young people are graduating and needing jobs, and the jobs are not there for them. The economy is not growing enough, but also just the same as in our society, the technology is affecting the kind of work that there is, and the Chinese factories are very automated. So it's not all his fault completely, but a lot of it is. I mean, the COVID disaster, COVID-19 became a pandemic because Xi Jinping's government suppressed news about this terrible new infectious disease and allowed it to spread globally and told lies about it internationally. So he's an insecure man. He's also not well. He's not in good health, and we've seen several public indications of that. He has managed to do what people thought would be impossible. He has created his own faction. He was son of a senior leader, so a trusted part of the oligarchy put in place as a pair of safe hands, is what the old leaders thought. But in fact, kind of reverse Gorbachev, when it was his time, instead of unraveling the Soviet system, he has reconstructed. He's quite nostalgic about the Mao Zedong era. He's a child of that era. So he's embraced a lot of the ideological approach. There's now political study in China again. People have to buy copies of Xi Jinping book, like they had to buy Mao Zedong book, and you'll see posters of Xi Jinping everywhere. Now, this was anathema at the end of the Cultural Revolution. There was a very strong rejection against the cult of the individual. He's restored that. He dresses like Mao. He stands like Mao. But he's also, under his government, has been the incorporation of modern technology of surveillance. And so China is now a surveillance state and an authoritarian, repressive state on a scale of which Mao Zedong could only dream of. And there is, in many ways, less freedom for Chinese people than there was before. Deng Xiaoping, after the Cultural Revolution, he said that it was okay for Chinese people to fa lao sao, means complain. Get in trouble for just talking to your friends and family and letting off steam about things. But now, if you go on WeChat and say some things critical of the government, you will be found. Because everybody with modern social media, everybody's a newspaper. That information can spread, and the government has to crack down on it. So Xi Jinping is, in summary, someone who is insecure, who's not a big brain, but has been around at important times in Chinese politics. He is very determined to protect the power of the CCP and make sure that it continues to rule China. He has turned back the clock on the political reform and economic reform that was underway in the Deng Xiaoping era. And he is pushing hard now on a global agenda, which Mao Zedong proposed, but could only theorize about.
So how limited or unlimited is his power? He can do basically anything. I mean, Xi Jinping within the system. Is his power unlimited basically or not really?
Well, you still have the old leaders around, and so this is an informal structure. So Hu Jintao is still alive, Wen Jiabao is still alive, and other senior leaders. And they will be worried about that he has overstretched. He has made the world wake up, particularly the US. The actions of Xi Jinping woke up the US. Before, they were believing their own rhetoric, that they could change China through the engagement strategy. And now the US has woken up and noticed that China sees them as the main enemy, the chief threat. And so the old leaders will want to return China to the foreign policy approach of Deng Xiaoping, which is hide your strengths and bide your time. Don't have a punch-up now, not with the US or over Taiwan.
What is maybe the difficult decision Xi Jinping has had to make so far in his political career? Or is it still ahead of him? And will it concern Taiwan?
Well, on the question of Taiwan, China's not going to invade because that would precipitate a US response. The US Congress has an agreement with Taiwan, not the Republic of China. So that replaced the military agreement that the United States had with the Republic of China after they switched diplomatic recognition in 1979 to the PRC. The US Congress passed an agreement that they would protect Taiwan if it was attacked. So as long as the government in Taiwan does not declare independence itself, which it won't, it's not foolish, there's a lot of missiles targeted against them, then if they were attacked first by the PRC, then the US is bound to protect Taiwan, and Japan would take an interest, as would Australia, New Zealand, other countries too. So, but what is happening is subversion, grand-scale subversion in Taiwan. And it's difficult because, in the Cold War, for a good reason, the ROC, it was oppressive, but for a good reason, it was a martial law to try and keep out this, what this Communist Party calls United Front work, foreign interference, subversion, spies, all of that. Because that is how the KMT lost China, is that they were subverted from within. It wasn't so much the military battles, because the CCP had much less forces. It was the internal corrosion of the KMT government through subversion, through underground Communist Party members and assets that they had in the KMT. And, human memory is very short. And now you have the KMT in Taiwan once again subverted by the CCP, and you've had other politicians too on the right or sort of aligned with KMT but separate, like the New Party, who also were close, who would go over to mainland China and doing deals. And also the business community has been very targeted. Because Taiwan is a democracy now, there's more openings for CCP foreign interference. But Taiwan has de-risked on the economic level. So they had very large percent of their FDI was in mainland China. About 10 years ago, it's down to 4% from about 70% before to 4% now. That's good. But what we're seeing is the most dangerous thing is the political environment, the impact of how China seems to have asset relations with some very senior people in Taiwan politics. And then if a elected government of Taiwan decided that, we're going to, in the words of the CCP, reunify with the People's Republic of China, not that they were ever part of the PRC, but that's the language that the CCP uses, then the US could not intervene, or no other partner could intervene. And that would change the strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific if Taiwan becomes part of the People's Republic of China. It was once called the unsinkable aircraft carrier. But obviously Taiwanese people will decide their own fate. But the thing is that they are, with subversion, it means you are not deciding, it's an outside power that is deciding. So that is the decision. That's not a turning point for Xi. That's already been underway for a long time. I don't think he has a difficult decision about that. It's working for him so far, what he's doing there. And what happens just with Putin also is that when you have, the more power you have, then the less alternative perspectives you hear. So that is what we see is some unwise decision making by Xi Jinping. There were people in China, academics and policymakers, who were proposing a more gradualist approach, more integrated approach with the international system. Xi Jinping's in a hurry, a lot like Putin, a lot like Trump. They're old men in a hurry, and that's why we're seeing recklessness at the moment, which is dangerous for the rest of the world.
Yeah. And maybe one last thing. It is often said in the West that China plays the long game, thinking decades ahead. And this is probably also connected to this idea of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. But is this really the case, that China is playing this long game, or this is somehow simplified Orientalistic view of China?
We're not talking about China here. We're talking about the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party government. So Communist Party governments, yes, they do plan, famously the 5-year plans. And the CCP talks about the 100-year plan from 1949 to 2049, where they want China to be. So they do plan long term. They have, as we know from Marx and Lenin, they have a vision for a different society, and they're working towards that. So that's a difference with our own societies, where we are collective and together we evaluate what does our society need when there are new challenges. We don't tend to have such a long-term plan because we are already comfortable with where we are and what we have. We don't have those expansionist territorial ideas. So CCP government has a long-term agenda, and they have the resources now to implement that agenda. And they have been saying since about 2008 and the global financial crisis that the West is weak and divided, and now is China's time.
Is it?
I would say that we should take the long view of history. It's going to be a difficult couple of years, and the small and medium powers need to stand together, not just the ideologically linked, those who are democracies, but all the small and medium powers have a lot in common, that we don't want the might is right system to rule, and that we want a rules-based international system that is a level playing field for all of us, where disputes are discussed rather than fought out. And so China can't get it its own way if we stand together, and if we in our societies do not allow foreign interference. We protect our societies and we protect our sovereignty. So it's not over yet.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe and listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. The link is in the episode description. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.